The prairie did not echo, it absorbed. Wind rolled like breath across the vast emptiness, carrying with it the hush of lives half-lived and names long forgotten. Beneath the blood-orange dusk, a man stood near the fence line, his figure still as an old oak, roots dug deep into earth and memory. Elias Boone had not spoken to another soul in 3 days, and that suited him just fine. He lived on a patch of land too humble to be called a ranch, too proud to be called a shack. Just a squat cabin, one barn leaning left, and horses whose backs had carried as many years as Elias had regrets. The grass had long since learned not to grow too tall, and the trees kept their distance. Even the birds seemed to hush their wings when they passed overhead. Elias was not yet old, but he had aged. The kind of aging sorrow brings, quiet, unremarkable, like how a photograph yellows in a drawer. His face bore the creases of years spent squinting toward the sun, toward the past, toward things that never came back. His eyes, though sharp and blue, had a habit of looking just past people, as though waiting for someone who might appear only when no one else was watching. Once there had been laughter in that cabin. A fire that cracked not just with heat, but with the music of a woman's hum and the squeals of a child discovering the world. But fever came early that year, a cruel, uninvited wind that took his wife, then his daughter, and left Elias with nothing but a cradle he could no longer look at. He buried them behind the barn, where wildflowers grew each spring as if the earth remembered kindness when he could not. After that, Elias stopped talking much. The townsfolk tried for a while, invites, handshakes, offers of pie and conversation. But grief is a wall that only lets in those who know where the cracks are, and Elias had sealed them shut. So the town let him be. Children whispered about him in the alleyways, calling him the ghost rancher. Women crossed the street when he rode in for supplies, not out of fear, but because they didn't know what to say to someone who had lost everything and chose to keep going. He wasn't cruel. He tipped his hat. He paid in full. He returned every borrowed tool. But there was something in him that had folded inward, like paper turned to ash. Something that hadn't unfolded since the day he laid 2 pine boxes into the earth. And yet, he wasn't dead. He rose with the sun, mended fences, brushed his horses, kept his boots clean. He cooked his meals and split his own wood. But it was a life of maintenance, not of motion. He wasn't going anywhere, just making sure the roof didn't leak too loud when the rain came. One morning, as winter whispered at the edge of the wind, Elias stood by the porch with coffee cooling in his hand. The sky was the color of tin, heavy with snow that hadn't yet found the nerve to fall. His dog, a slow old thing named Birch, lifted its head and gave a low whine. Elias followed Birch's gaze. A wagon creaked along the distant road, smaller than it should have been, led by a mule too thin for comfort. Elias squinted. There were no other wagons, no trail of travelers. Just the one. A figure rode the seat, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, hat tugged low. And beside her, for it was a woman, that much he could tell by the tilt of her spine, was a child. Not riding, but curled up under blankets at her feet. Elias said nothing. He watched them pass. They didn't look over. The woman held the reins like someone who had learned to steer through storms, not by strength, but by not breaking. Later that day, the sheriff rode past, slow and thoughtful. He nodded toward Elias, stopped only long enough to mutter, "New folk just settled near the edge of town. Widow maybe. Or something like it. No husband come with. Just her and the kid. Folks talkin' already." Elias only nodded. Then went back to splitting wood. But that night, his dreams wandered. He saw a girl with soot on her cheeks and eyes too large for her age. He saw a woman's hands, not delicate, not polished, but steady. She was lifting a heavy crate on her own, jaw clenched, back straight. She didn't ask for help in the dream. She never looked at him. In the morning, Elias found himself staring at the road again. The wagon wasn't there, of course. They'd made it to town. But his eyes stayed trained on the path longer than needed. 2 days passed. Then 3. On the 4th day, Birch barked. Elias stepped outside. There, by the fence, stood the girl. The child from the wagon. Her coat was too thin, boots mismatched. But she held an apple in both hands and was trying to feed it to Elias's old mare, Juneberry. The horse didn't mind. She nudged the girl gently, lips brushing the apple with practiced care. The child looked up at Elias, unsure if she'd done something wrong. He didn't shout. Didn't frown. Just said softly, "She likes 'em peeled." The girl tilted her head, thinking it over, then nodded solemnly, as if taking notes in her mind. Before he could ask where her kin was, a voice called out, "Maybelle." The name rolled over the fence like sunlight through lace. Elias looked up. She was there, the woman from the wagon. Standing by the road, boots covered in dust, sleeves rolled. Her face wasn't beautiful in the way magazines told you to be. But it was honest. And tired. And strong. She gave him a nod, not of gratitude, not yet, but of acknowledgement. As one survivor sees another, and knows better than to pry. Maybelle returned to her side. The woman took the girl's hand and walked on without explanation or apology. Elias watched them go until they vanished between the junipers. That night, as he sat with coffee and silence, he found himself listening to the wind differently. As if it might carry words not yet spoken. As if silence was no longer enough. He didn't know their names. Didn't know their story. But something had shifted in him, not a crack, not yet. Just a leaning. A leaning toward the sound of feet that might one day return. And for the first time in years, Elias left the porch light burning. Clara Rose was not a woman built for pity, though she had often been offered it in quiet looks and tighter purses. She arrived in town with wind-bitten cheeks, gloves too thin for the cold, and a spine so straight it made folk uncomfortable. She didn't smile much, not because she was unkind, but because smiles had become a currency she'd learned to spend sparingly. Maybelle, the little girl with her, had the kind of silence that made grown men feel helpless. She clung to Clara's skirt like ivy to a crumbling wall, her eyes wide and dark, her breath fogging the air with soft worry. Clara called her niece, though no blood connected them beyond grief. Her sister had passed the girl into Clara's arms with the last bit of strength she had, a fevered night, a shaking whisper, asterisk. "You'll take her, won't you?" Asterisk, and Clara had not said no. She never said no when love asked something of her. The townsfolk didn't ask much. They watched. They whispered. The general store man narrowed his eyes when Clara inquired about flour and lard, asking if her husband would be along to settle accounts. When she said there was no husband, just the two of them, his mouth twitched as if swallowing a sour truth. "Got no menfolk to vouch for you?" he asked. "I don't need vouching," she replied, voice low but unflinching. He said nothing else, but handed her the goods with fingers stiff as fence wire. Others were more open with their judgment. One man, thick with drink and assumptions, offered her a place to stay in exchange for warming his bed. She didn't answer him, only turned away with the kind of silence that scorched deeper than a slap. He muttered something crude under his breath, but didn't follow. They settled in a small, abandoned homestead on the outskirts of town, where the roof sagged in one corner and the hearth hadn't seen fire in years. Clara spent the first night patching holes with what scraps she had and curling around Maybelle to keep her warm. In the morning she gathered wood, drew water, and set about stitching a life from what others had left behind. She never asked for help. Not out of pride, but out of experience. Help always came with strings, and she'd spent too long cutting herself free. Elias saw her twice in that first week. Once at the well, where she struggled to hoist the bucket without letting go of Maybelle's hand. And again when she passed his land, her face pale from cold, eyes locked on the horizon as if daring it to offer her something better. He didn't speak to her either time. But he watched, not with judgment, with something closer to recognition. She was not unlike the prairie itself, scarred, beautiful in ways most overlooked, and carrying more storms than sunshine. Maybelle was the thread between them. The child began wandering, not far, just enough to seek out something gentler than the constant thrum of survival. She was quiet, but not afraid. One afternoon, Elias found her near his pasture again, trying to coax Juneberry to nibble at a piece of dried apple. "She likes them peeled," he told her softly, his voice like weathered leather. Maybelle didn't flinch. She only looked at him, then down at the apple, as though already trying to solve the problem. That's when Clara came. Her footsteps weren't loud, but they held purpose. She stepped around the edge of the fence and stopped a few paces away. Her eyes went first to the girl, then to Elias, measuring him with a glance honed by necessity. "Hope she wasn't a bother," she said. "She wasn't," Elias replied, not moving from his place near the post. "Mare took a liking to her." Clara nodded once. A quiet truce. She called Maybelle, and the girl obeyed without protest. As they turned, Clara offered Elias a final glance, not soft, not warm, but real. The kind of look that said, "I see you seeing us. And I'll remember, *." That night, Elias sat longer than usual on his porch. He carved wood, as he often did when his hands felt restless. This time, it was a small figure, not detailed, just the shape of a child with a hand outstretched, like she was offering something. He didn't know why he made it. Only that once it was finished, he didn't throw it in the fire like the others. The next week brought more snow, and fewer visitors to town. Clara came only when necessary, her trips brief, her words precise. She asked no questions, gave no explanations. Still, she was noticed. Mrs. Templeton, the preacher's wife, began to watch Clara with hawkish interest, her gloved hands always folded tight. There were whispers in the church pews. About the woman with no wedding band. About how the girl didn't look much like her. About how maybe she wasn't decent. Maybe she was running from something. Maybe she was the reason her men left her behind. None of it reached Clara's ears directly. But she heard. People didn't need to say things loud for them to be felt. And through it all, Elias watched. Not out of curiosity. Out of something slower, heavier. He began leaving the fence unlatched, so the girl could come closer without climbing. He began placing apples on the fence post. Maybelle took them without a word, always careful, always grateful. One morning, Elias found a small handkerchief folded near the post, embroidered with rough, uneven stitches, "Thank you." He held it longer than he meant to. That evening, he returned it, not with words, but with a smooth stone wrapped in a ribbon. It wasn't much. But for a child, it might mean something. The next time Clara came to town, she paused outside the general store when Elias happened to walk past. Their eyes met. She didn't smile. Neither did he. But something passed between them, not affection, not yet. Just the acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, not every stranger stayed strange forever. She spoke first. "Thank you for being kind to her." Elias's voice was low. "Didn't do much. You didn't scare her," Clara said, and that was enough. He tipped his hat. She turned and went inside. Later, as dusk gathered and shadows stretched long across the road, Elias stood again by his porch. Birch lay at his feet, tail twitching with some unspoken awareness. A wind picked up from the north, carrying with it the faintest trace of wood smoke and winter. And somewhere in the distance, not far, but not near, a door closed with quiet determination. Elias didn't know what Clara had left behind, or what it cost her to come here, alone but for a child who clung like the world might vanish if she let go. But he knew the look of someone who'd been cast out and kept walking anyway. He knew that look because he wore it too. And so he stayed standing long after the stars came, watching the road, wondering, not if he'd see her again, but what might happen if, next time, he said something more than just, "She likes them peeled." The snow came softly that year, not in a furious storm but in a quiet, persistent hush, as though the sky was trying to muffle the world. It blanketed the prairie in white silence, cloaking even the brittle bones of fence posts and the twisted branches of leafless trees. Smoke curled from chimneys like breath from sleeping giants, and every footstep left a mark that the wind would later try to erase. Elias worked slower in the cold. His joints ached in the mornings, and the horses needed more care. Still, he moved with purpose. Routine was a kind of faith to him. Keep feeding the stove, keep feeding the animals, keep feeding the days until they turned into something else. Maybelle came less often now, bundled tight and red-cheeked, always with her eyes searching for something she didn't have a name for. When she did come, Elias would be sure to have something waiting, an apple, a carved trinket, a story spoken like wind, slow, meandering, and without sharp edges. Clara had begun to nod when they crossed paths. Not just acknowledgement now, but something softer, permission. She still guarded herself with the care of a woman who'd survived too much kindness turned cruel. But she no longer looked through Elias. She looked at him. That was its own sort of beginning. Their conversations remained brief at first, just weather and horses and the price of flour. But their silences grew warmer, more comfortable. Words weren't needed to fill every space. Sometimes presence was enough. And it was in those quiet spaces, between words, between glances, between seasons, that something began to root. Elias offered to fix the roof of Clara's cabin one afternoon after seeing smoke puffing sideways from the hearth, pushed by wind that should have been kept out. She hesitated, then agreed with a nod, as if she had measured his offer against all her past debts and found it unburdened. He brought his tools, never stepping beyond the threshold unless invited. Maybelle followed him around like a quiet shadow, handing him nails and pointing out boards that creaked under snow weight. Clara made coffee strong enough to melt frostbite and served it with hands that no longer shook quite so much. While he worked, Elias caught pieces of Clara's life through the windows she left open, her humming, low and unfinished, her laughter, rare but real, and the sound of Maybelle learning how to read aloud from an old primer, each syllable shaped with care. One evening, as dusk melted into indigo, Clara stepped outside with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and handed Elias a slice of cornbread wrapped in cloth. He took it gently, their fingers brushing for the first time. "You don't ask questions," she said. Elias studied her face, the way the shadows played against her cheekbones. "I figure answers come when they want to." She nodded, looking away for a breath before turning back. "That's rare. Most folks pry like they're owed something. I've owed enough in my life to know better," he said simply. That was the first time they lingered past necessity. Clara told him about the farm her father had tried to keep. About the man she'd once married who left her carrying more than just a child. He'd left her carrying silence, shame, and a bruised kind of strength that she still wore like armor. "He never hit me," she said, almost like an apology. "But he could starve a room with a look. Make you feel like breathing too loud was a sin." Elias didn't offer pity. He only listened, like a tree listens to wind, steady, unmoving, and present. When she fell quiet, he said, "Maybelle's got your stubborn." She smiled then, small and unexpected. "She's got more than mine. She's got her mama's heart. Gentle like a stream, but strong enough to wear down stone." They didn't speak of the dead often. But when they did, it was without fear. Both had walked with ghosts too long to flinch at their shadows. As the snow deepened and days shortened, Elias found reasons to visit more often. Sometimes to bring firewood, sometimes to fix a hinge, sometimes just to hear Maybelle's halting reading or to sit near the hearth while Clara sewed. He brought his carving knife one day and began shaping a piece of wood into a bird, letting Maybelle watch, asking her what kind of wings it should have. "Big ones," she said, eyes shining. "So it can carry people when they're sad." Clara, sewing in the corner, paused, her needle stilled. Elias looked at her, and for the first time, she didn't look away. "They're getting used to you," she said later, after Maybelle had gone to bed and the fire had mellowed to orange embers. Elias nodded. "Takes time. Does it bother you? Letting people in again?" His answer took a while. "No. Not anymore." Clara looked down at her hands, fingers folded like prayer. "I never thought I'd trust someone again. Not really. But Maybelle sleeps through the night now. First time in 2 years." Elias felt something shift in his chest, subtle but undeniable. He had no words for it. Only a quiet that meant more than speech. One day, While the snows softened under the earliest promise of spring, Elias found a bundle of mended shirts on his porch, his shirts, ones he thought too worn to save. The stitching was careful, the fabric cleaned and pressed. No note, just the touch of someone who had seen what was frayed and decided it was still worth keeping. He didn't speak of it. Just wore one the next time he visited. Clara noticed. Said nothing. But her eyes, once stormy with caution, warmed like soil touched by sun. And still, the town watched. Some with gossip curling on their tongues, others with quiet hope. The preacher tipped his hat to Clara one Sunday. A woman offered her a spool of thread without charging. Small mercies. But they mattered. Elias never asked for anything. Never stepped further than Clara allowed. But one evening, he brought an old blanket, hand-stitched long ago by the woman he buried. He held it out, unsure if it was right. "She'd want someone else to feel its warmth," he said. Clara ran her fingers over the fabric, the edges frayed, the patterns faded. Her voice was barely audible. "Thank you." That night, Maybelle curled beneath the quilt and slept with a smile. Clara watched her, hand resting on the child's chest, and felt a kind of quiet peace she hadn't known in years. Outside, Elias stood beneath the moon, his breath fogging the air. He didn't go home right away. He lingered. Some part of him understood that spring was coming, not just in the soil or sky, but in the slow unfurling of hearts that had once been frostbitten. And in that moment, he realized he no longer waited for the past to return. He was learning to live in the warmth between cold seasons. The first sign came in the scent, wood smoke, but bitter, not homey. It rode the air with an urgency that didn't belong to hearths or cooking fires. Elias smelled it before he saw the orange flicker beyond the ridge. He dropped the feed sack mid-step and ran, boots hammering the ground as the prairie winds turned restless, carrying panic on their backs. Clara's cabin stood at the edge of dry grasslands, and the wind had been fierce all week, tugging at shutters, sighing under eaves. He saw the glow before he saw the girl. Maybelle, barefoot in the snow, her arms outstretched, sobbing for someone who hadn't answered her cries yet. Elias swept her up without a word, cradled her against his chest. "Where's Clara?" Maybelle pointed with a trembling hand. The cabin's far side blazed along the roof, licking at the rafters like a starving beast. Elias set the child down behind the well and ran for the door, heat searing his face before he even touched the handle. She was inside. He knew it in his bones. He didn't shout. Didn't waste air on panic. He moved like a man who'd been through fire once before and knew its mind. Inside, smoke twisted like ghosts, thick and stinging. He covered his mouth, dropped low, and found her near the hearth, dazed, her ankle trapped beneath a collapsed beam. She looked up at him, face streaked with soot, a cut blooming red along her temple. "You shouldn't be here," she coughed. "Not leaving without you," he rasped. He pried the beam off with his shoulder, groaning as heat singed through his coat. Clara cried out but didn't stop him. He lifted her, she was light as memory, and carried her out through the smoke into the biting wind. Maybelle's cry pierced the night when she saw them. Elias dropped to his knees in the snow, Clara coughing against his chest. The fire had taken the roof by then. Flames curled high into the dark, and the cabin cracked like old bones breaking. But none of them looked back. They stayed that night at Elias's place. Clara lay on the cot, legs splinted and bandaged. Maybelle wouldn't let go of her hand. Elias sat by the fire, shirt scorched and fingers blistered. None of them slept much. But all of them breathed, and that was enough. In the morning, Clara stirred, blinking against sunlight she hadn't expected to see again. Elias brought her tea, strong and bitter, with honey stirred in. She sipped it slowly, each movement deliberate. "I had everything in there," she whispered. "I know. Every scrap I brought with me. Every letter. Every stitch of her mother's dress. Gone." He didn't offer comfort. Just presence. Let the quiet fill the spaces where sorrow lived. "But it didn't take her," she said after a while, looking at Maybelle curled beside her. "Didn't take me. Didn't take you? He nodded. What the fire didn't burn, it tried to. But it failed. For the next week, Clara stayed in Elias's cabin. Maybelle followed Birch around like a second tail, laughing for the first time in days. The dog didn't mind. The snow began to melt, and Green peeked through like promises, no longer afraid of breaking. People came. Brought flour, cloth, old coats, kind eyes. The preacher's wife brought a loaf of bread and stayed a little longer than expected, her hands wringing the hem of her apron as she sat by Clara's bedside. I misjudged you, she admitted. Clara didn't answer at first. Then, people often do. I thought you were hiding something, the woman said softly. I was, Clara said. My fear. Mrs. Templeton's eyes watered. She didn't stay long, but when she left, she squeezed Clara's hand and called her by her name. Elias built a new shelter behind his barn. Not much, just a room and a stove, but he made it with care. He sanded the beams smooth, lined the walls with quilt batting to keep the cold out, and carved a small wooden swallow to hang over the door. When it was ready, Clara stepped into it slowly, like walking into a memory she hadn't yet made. It's not much, Elias said. She turned in the doorway, light on her face, no longer afraid of it. It's more than anyone's ever given me. I didn't give it, he said. Just made space for it. The nights stretched longer again, not because of darkness, but because time had begun to unfold differently. Clara took to sitting beside Elias as he carved, hands folded in her lap, not idle, just resting. He didn't ask her to do anything. She didn't offer. They existed beside one another like rivers running parallel, never forcing, only flowing. One evening she handed him a worn envelope, creased and smoke-scented. I managed to save this, she said. Inside was a faded photo of Maybelle's mother, Clara's sister, smiling in front of an apple tree. Elias held it carefully, as if it might vanish in the wrong hands. She had the same eyes, he said. She had everything, Clara replied. And she lost it before she could teach Maybelle the difference between fear and safety. She's learning now. Clara nodded, eyes shining. I never thought I'd watch someone else love her like that. You were never alone in that, Elias said. It wasn't a declaration. Just truth, plain as fence posts and sky. Clara reached out then, fingers brushing his callous hand. He didn't flinch. Let her take it, her touch gentle and firm. Maybelle found them that way, and instead of teasing or asking questions, she just climbed into Clara's lap and tucked her head beneath her chin. Later, as Elias stoked the fire, Clara watched him with quiet thoughtfulness. You think the prairie ever heals? She asked. He looked out past the window, where snowmelt dripped from the eaves and the ground pulsed with the breath of roots unseen. Only if someone stays long enough to care for it, he said. She considered that. Then, maybe I will. The light from the fire flickered across her face, casting warmth where there had once been shadow. That night, she didn't sleep in the spare cot. She stayed beside the fire, beside Elias, with Maybelle curled between them like a bridge between storms. Outside, wind rustled through the grass no longer buried in snow. It whispered against the door, not trying to come in, just reminding them that the world was still wide and wild. But inside, there was a different kind of weather now. The kind that didn't scorch. The kind that healed. And in the soft hush before dawn, as the first birds began to stir, Elias reached out and gently rested his hand over Clara's. She didn't pull away.